Welcome to the War on the Rocks podcast, covering strategy, defense, and foreign affairs. My name is Nicholas Danforth, editor and host of today's show. This morning, we're delighted to be sitting down with the Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Linda Fagan. Thank you for coming on the War on the Rocks podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing me to tell a little bit of the Coast Guard story.
In the State of the Coast Guard, which you just gave recently, you mentioned that your top acquisition priority was the Polar Security Cutter. I saw in your bio that you previously served on an icebreaker. You just got back from a trip to Scandinavia. So let's start in the Arctic.
I always like to start with the fact that we are an Arctic nation. So this isn't us declaring ourselves as a near Arctic nation, as China did a few years ago. We and our national security are commingled with our Arctic interest. So I was on an icebreaker as a young ensign many years ago, and the Polar Star at that point was one of two heavy icebreakers that the nation was operating. Polar Star is currently our only heavy icebreaker in operation. And each year, she actually sails south to Antarctica, and we have national security interest at the South Pole as well, but she breaks the ice channel to allow resupply in. In the Arctic, Healy, which is a medium icebreaker, has each summer goes up there, does the science operations, icebreaking, and it's an international mission that they do. They most recently circumnavigated through the Northwest Passage. They were operating above 65 degrees off of Russia, consistent with international law and international order. And so, that one presence and being actually presence in the Arctic matter, and then creating opportunity to work with our allies and partners. And I was just in Norway at the Arctic Coast Guard Forum,
tell us about that.
Where the Arctic nations come together to talk about areas of shared interest and alignment. And there are a lot of opportunity in the Arctic. The Norwegians are talking about bringing one of their tall ship sailing vessels through the Northwest Passage in the summer of 25. And we talked collectively about exchanging officers, finding opportunity to interoperate with each other. Again, the rules-based order, agreed international law, presence, free and open, the kinds of principles that apply in the Pacific apply in the Arctic as well. And so we're excited for the opportunity to field Polar Security Cutter on behalf of the nation. Bollinger, Mississippi is the yard that is contracted to build that ship. We have not built a security or an icebreaker in the country since the mid-'70s. It's going to be a complicated ship to build, but I'm 100% confident in the design and what we will be delivered. But we've still got some time before it actually starts to take form.
Well, and just not to get off on a sidetrack here, but mentioning the design, how is a icebreaker different now than it was in the 70s? What is this additional ship going to enable us to do in the Arctic?
So the Polar Security Cutter will allow us to create more persistent presence. Program of record of 3 heavy Polar Security Cutters. In some aspects, not a lot changes, right? It is a just sheer brute force game. So you need big, heavy ships to break ice. Having said that, hull forms have continued to evolve as nations that do build icebreakers have learned about how to make more efficient hull forms. Propulsion systems and system design have changed. The Polar Star has 3 shafts, all diesel, electric, controllable pitch propellers. The new Polar Security Cutter will have a centerline shaft like that, but then we'll use azipod technology. So it's very similar propulsion systems to what cruise ships use. Think outboard engine, much, much bigger than this. These are both like 3-story high propulsion units, but you can turn them. So literally you can make the ship go sideways with that kind of maneuverability.
Anything else in the Arctic before we shift to the Pacific? I don't want to
move
south too quickly.
And again, in the Arctic, our national sovereignty is involved and engaged in the Arctic. We have a 200-mile exclusive economic zone. We've got outer continental shelf, and creating presence is important. I mentioned China and declaring themselves as a near Arctic state, but it is important to remember Russia also is an Arctic nation, and we share a maritime boundary line with Russia. Certainly, in the Bering. And while they operate icebreakers and have their own national interest and they're part of the Arctic, we as a Coast Guard have normalized behavior with our Russian counterpart as it pertains to our maritime boundary line. A lot of it has to do with fishing and fisheries enforcement, but normalized patterns of behavior are important because they minimize the risk of miscalculation. And so occasionally a Russian fisherman will trend over on our side of the line. We've got, we call them and they bring it back, and occasionally ours will do the same. But fishing and fish stocks will be a new kind of driver of changed patterns in the Arctic. The fish follow the water temperature. The water temperatures are warming. The fish are migrating further north. If any of your listeners watch The Deadliest Catch, right, this is the crowd that's up there going after some of the fish and the crab stocks, and you can see that they're operating further north, just demonstrating how patterns are beginning to change in the Arctic.
In the Indo-Pacific, then, one of the things I was most surprised about when I started editing articles about this and War on the Rocks, some of our readers probably know way more about this, some of them don't, was just how active the Coast Guard was in the Indo-Pacific, how big both its practical role was and its diplomatic role was. You've also been to the Pacific recently, as I understand. Tell us about what the Coast Guard is doing there.
Recently had somebody sort of observe to me, and this is very true. So first, we're a Pacific nation, which is why we're talking about the Pacific. And we have, a number of allies and partners in the region that engagement is critical. But the observation was the Coast Guard forward deployed in World War II. And in many regards, we've never fully returned home. We continue to operate across the world's oceans, and in a way that bolsters another nation's sovereignty and capability and capacity. We bring good governance, rule of law, normalized professional maritime behaviors. And so in many of the island nations in the Pacific, they may not welcome a U.S. Navy visit, but they are eager and hungry for a U.S. Coast Guard visit. And it's because we're really good at meeting the nation where they are. So if they need assistance learning how to do outboard engine repair, we can do that for them. If they need assistance in conducting law enforcement boardings, again, an area of expertise that we can bring to them. The demand for Coast Guard operations, like say, basically anywhere I travel in the world, everybody's like, we want you, we need more of you, can you send us a ship? So most recently, the Coast Guard cutter Harriet Lane, which is a 270-foot cutter that was, up until December of last year, home ported on the East Coast of the United States. Her home port was changed to Honolulu, Hawaii, and we've got budget support for this, and she is now operating as a Pacific support tender. It's a model that we used in the Caribbean a number of years ago, so this is an operating concept that the Coast Guard has done. We know it works, it's proven, and Harriet Lane has just finished her first deployment through the South Pacific. And where the particular value proposition is in leveraging the bilateral agreements that we've got 12 of them in the region. So specifically in Vanuatu and Fiji, the bilateral agreements were leveraged. So what this means is Harriet Lane, and I was in Vanuatu when Harriet Lane was there. Harriet Lane import in Vanuatu, and she embarks for Vanuatu fisheries enforcement officials. And then we take them out into Vanuatu's EEZ. So Vanuatu members enforcing Vanuatu's exclusive economic zone, their sovereignty in their waters, where they boarded several Chinese fishing vessels. And, there were a couple of violations, none of them significant, but it had been almost 5 years since Vanuatu had been able to create that kind of presence and enforcement and engagement in their own sovereign waters. And again, this is the value proposition. We don't tell Vanuatu how to enforce their own sovereignty, but we create the opportunity for them to do that.
And on purely practical terms, tell me a little bit what those missions look like.
Yeah, so, the fisheries mission is, it's really about presence, engagement, finding vessels that are fishing, and then verify whether they're fishing in accordance with, in this case, state law or national law of Vanuatu. But then there are also a number of international agreements, where if you find a fishing vessel on the high seas, so the high seas drift net fishing agreement, and there's a number of regional fisheries management organizations that kind of overlay the region, all with the purpose of ensuring that fishing for pick a species is done in a way that's sustainable and does not create the collapse or the diminishment of the fish stock. And it is a real problem. Illegal fishing I'm focused on the Pacific, right? It's a worldwide problem. Illegal fishing, so illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, IUUF, literally goes on around the world. We experience it in the Gulf of Mexico with Mexican fishermen fishing across our boundary line for red snapper in contravention of our own national law. So even the U.S. is not immune from these kinds of, basically illegal activity.
And beyond illegal fishing, the other missions that you guys support?
Yeah, so, a lot of what we do in the region then is, is partner key leader engagements, subject matter expertise, interoperating. We've recently, we're sailing and operating alongside Philippine Coast Guard, Japan Coast Guard, Korea Coast Guard. So whether it's working with an island nation or fellow Coast Guard or Navy in the region, those are, any and all of the engagement opportunities that we look for. And the other thing I should highlight, I'm talking about big ships, but we've got mobile training teams with people, small units, 2, 3, 4, members of the Coast Guard. You may have expertise in, again, I talked about small engine repair. Pick an area that a country may need help with, and we'll send them into the country, provide a training for a week, 2 weeks, whatever may be helpful to that country to create capacity, create capability, and expand their own ability to enforce their own sovereignty.
One of the things the articles we've had on this subject always mention is the personal relationships, the diplomatic relationships that grow out of this kind of engagement.
So I was in Malaysia, this is a few years ago, and there was a two-star admiral there who had graduated from the United States Coast Guard Academy about 25 years previously, and they had just graduated a young ensign. And so this breadth of experience, and it speaks to the value of having those operations and in interactions and exchanges. We run a course in Yorktown called the International Maritime Officers Course. We've been running it for 20 plus years. I was at a security forum in Cabo Verde that the Navy hosted last year. There were 25 graduates of the course, for everybody from a most recent graduate to 20 plus years. And it speaks to the just person by person commitment and enduring value of those kinds of opportunities. We learn from our international partners, and they in turn learn from us. And so then when you have a ship in the region or Anashe or others, those relationships are already, the foundations have been laid, they've been built, and it allows you to just build on some great aligned view on what it means to be a professional maritime Navy or Coast Guard.
And I know you've been talking a lot about the rule-based order, about enforcing maritime law. What's your perspective on UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea?
Yeah, and so, in the United States and certainly the U.S. Coast Guard, we operate at all times consistent with the law of the sea, yet the U.S. has not acceded to that international convention. And because we're not a member of the convention, as things like extended outer continental shelf claims are made and filed, we don't have a seat at that table. And it is of particular interest with regard to the U.S. and Russia in the Arctic. And again, we operate consistent with all of that law, but not being a member and not having a seat at the table as others operate in ways that erode that agreed international order, good on all of that good governance, leaves the United States at a disadvantage. We're a flag state, a port state, a coastal state. The Law of the Sea Convention outlines what all your authorities and responsibilities are in those three buckets, and the U.S. Coast Guard operates in all three of those worlds in the majority way for the United States.
I just want to take a brief break from our conversation to remind listeners that if they're interested in more analysis of Russia, if they're interested in more analysis of the war in Ukraine, consider subscribing to our membership program, where, among many other things, you'll get Mike Kaufman's Russia Contingency.
People bring up, as an analogy, the Iran-Iraq war, or prolonged wars of attrition that drag on for a long period of time. And then the reality is that both sides are in practice losers of the war because of how far it sets them back generationally and in terms of the country's development. So I certainly hope it's not going to be that kind of war. And I for one, think that even though the war may continue on formally, I think it'll end sooner than that. What worries me the most is that there's a good chance that how this war ends simply ensures another unhappy and unsustainable peace where nobody sticks to the deal. There aren't the right security commitments or the right things done on the ground to help bolster and ensure Ukraine's security, and we end up getting a third war.
And with that, back to our conversation with the Commandant. I know you touched on this a little bit in relation to Russia, but I also wanted to ask, does the threat from Russia, does the threat from China look any different from a Coast Guard perspective?
Yeah, so as we operate as a Coast Guard anywhere in the world, and this is very true in the Pacific, we operate consistent with the international law of the sea. We abide by the code for unexpected encounters at sea, all of the things that it means to be a professional military maritime force. We do it each and every day and in every interaction. What those norms, rules of behavior are become a little grayer when you look at China Coast Guard, and their militia in particular, and you see their activities focused on the Philippines and the resupply. So our approach to this is we're gonna operate and navigate anywhere that's allowed by international law, but we'll do it in a way again that's consistent with international law. And so certainly we're watching China closely with regard to how they are conducting themselves as we operate ships in the region. When we send a large national security cutter into the Western Pacific, it's all done under the fold of Indo-PACOM, under their operational control. So we aren't there as a Coast Guard operating independently. We're well aligned with our DoD counterparts. And a national security cutter is very frigate-like. It's got Navy-type, Navy-owned system, very, very capable ship. And then, with regard to Russia and their operation, right, we have, again, as I would describe, kind of a normalized pattern of behavior with the Russians. We obviously watch them closely. They watch us closely. And as the world continues to evolve and change, it's just, part of what we need to continue to look at as we ensure that we've got the operating risk profile in the right place.
And how, going forward, if relations with China worsened, if, in the nightmare scenario of a Taiwan scenario, what does the Coast Guard's role look like there?
Yeah, so, the Coast Guard is written into a number, in fact, every one of the COCOMs has some Coast Guard asset sort of, allocated, apportioned into their con plans and O plans. And so it becomes scenario dependent, but the Coast Guard is reflected in all those, and we would work to align in support of whoever the lead COCOM was or is. In a conflict or in a situation where the United States needs to move a lot of military equipment, we have a key role in the military outload ports and ensuring the safety and the security in the harbors and in the inland waterways of the U.S. And so that would be an immediate demand for some of our, I'll call them riverine, but our small boat and the harbor community beyond just the big ship support and people support to the combatant commanders.
And that leads into my next question for you, which is that in February, the president signed an executive order empowering the Coast Guard to focus on digital threats as they relate to the security of our nation's ports.
Not everybody, I think, fully recognizes or understands our role in the marine transportation system. It's $5.4 trillion of economic commerce and benefit that flows in and out of our ports and our inland waterways, and the Coast Guard's got a key and pivotal role in that. We inspect foreign ships for compliance with international and U.S. standards. We work with regulated facilities to ensure that they've got appropriate safety and security measures in place. We license U.S. mariners. We do accident investigations. We mark the channels and approaches to our harbors with aids to navigation, and have had authority for sort of response mitigation in the result of a disaster or a event impacting the marine transportation system. The executive order in February clarifies that response authority also includes responses following a cyber attack or a cyber incident. So authority the Coast Guard already had, but clarification that in fact, if it were a cyber triggering event, it extends beyond that. And so We have established a cyber specialty rating as an organization, investing in that expertise, both for our own systems and for the industry that we work alongside. We've been hiring civilians at the district level who are experts in how the marine transportation system functions, but also as experts in cyber and cyber risk management and cyber mitigation strategies. And so these are all areas where the Coast Guard is involved. Obviously, a lot of interest around cranes and the crane technology. 85, 90% of the world's cranes are built and come from China. And so working with ports and facilities to ensure that there's not unacceptable risk with regard to potential chips or chip technology. We also are working a notice of proposed rulemaking, so a federal rulemaking that will establish cyber standards for the industry. This will be a substantial rulemaking, lots of opportunity for comment. And if any of your listeners are familiar with the rulemaking process, it's never easy and it's not quick, but we're engaged in that around cyber and the marine transportation system.
When it comes to cybersecurity threats to our ports, this is one of those things that sounds, to me at least, very bad but very abstract. Can you talk us through what the threat actually looks like?
A lot of attention has been, like, say, around cranes and some of the crane technology. You can broaden this to pick any of the major infrastructure systems in the country. And anywhere where you've got a device that connects to the internet or allows a reach-in creates a vulnerability. And so a lot of attention, again, around the marine transportation system. But that potential exists across a number of different elements of the infrastructure. I like to say I have a car built by the Germans that they like to send me notes and tell me my oil needs to be changed. And it's not that they're guessing that my oil needs to be changed. Like, they've got an ability to monitor the vehicle. And those same kinds of vulnerabilities, opportunities sit across the system. So, one of the things that we work to do is just, good cyber hygiene, changing default passwords, understanding your own system and where those vulnerabilities may lie, go a long ways to mitigating the risk and potential for an adversary to access your system and create sort of mayhem, if you will. When the Dolly, the large container ship, hit the bridge in Baltimore, that was the first question. Was this a terrorist attack? Was there a cyber element to it? And the NTSB's had lead on that investigation. We've been supporting them, and there's no evidence of any of those situations. But it would not be impossible. But, like I say, it takes a lot to connect the dots to get there. But it's not to say that it's not. It is possible, and we just need to all remain vigilant to buying down cyber risk in our own personal lives and in our critical elements of infrastructure in the nation.
Also mentioned the role of data, the role of AI, analytics, unmanned systems. Mm-hmm. Talk us through some of the other technologies that you're bringing to bear that are changing the way you do your work.
Yeah, so let me touch on a couple of the unmanned systems that we're using, and they've been particularly helpful to us. So Scan Eagle is a ship-launched, ship-retrieved, unmanned system capacity that we've got deployed on all of our national security cutters. It has been game-changing, particularly in our counter-narcotics efforts. It gives us the advantage. So when you've got a ship out there that you're looking to put on a target, in other words, whether it's a go-fast or a semi-submersible, the unmanned system's got a much more loiter capacity. We can acquire the target, keep the ship over the horizon until we're ready to actually affect the boarding and do the pursuit. And so the ships that are in the Western Pacific have Scan Eagle. We regularly operate that system there. Closer to home, we've contracted with Sail Drone, which is they're in a really fascinating company. So this isn't a float platform. It's true, it's completely unmanned, and they have sort of cracked the code on power, how to power that particular conveyance and the sensors on board. And we've got them on contract in the Florida Straits, basically against the irregular migration challenges that we face as a nation. And the flow of people attempting perilous illegal journeys at sea is significantly down from where it was just, a year and a year plus ago. And Sail Drone helps with that because it's visible, it's presence, there's sensors. We did have, this was kind of a funny situation about a year ago, Haitian sail freighter, and they tried to tow the sail drone off. Of course, we could see them in the camera, and it was fairly easy to go out and resolve. But it's a way to create presence and sensor capacity that doesn't require people, and just helps create the kind of knowledge and information you need to create operational effect and impact. And at the end of the day, it's about putting steel on target, doing the interdiction, ensuring that no one loses their lives as they make those perilous illegal journeys towards the United States. And unmanned technology is a key part of that.
Unmanned technology being as important as it is, people obviously remain important. You've also focused on workforce issues. You mentioned the Talent Management Transformation Task Force, its role in making it easier for people to join and serve. Tell us about the changes that are taking place in that realm.
The talent transformation was one of my key tenets when I came in 2 years ago. And we run a system just like the other militaries. It's an up-route system. The system is optimized for an 18-year-old. Either to come into the academy, get a 4-year degree and be commissioned, or to enter boot camp in Cape May and begin to build your skills from the very beginning, from the bottom, if you will. That is not the workforce that we're recruiting today. We've got people in Cape May with bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. We occasionally get a PhD through there. So one of the big changes in the system has been to acknowledge the life skill and experience people are bringing with them into the service. Where if you have an EMT credential, be a great example, you're basically 75% to a corpsman, to one of our medical professionals. So the school that we put you through out in Petaluma, California, we've begun customizing those programs so that you learn how to operate a clinic and what it means to be a medical provider in the Coast Guard, but we're not giving you basic medical expertise because you already have it. So people are graduating. We've had about 150 people graduate 30% quicker across a number of the schools by just acknowledging the skills that they bring with us. Assumptions around transferring, staying in one place, lateraling into positions, promoting into an advanced position, all of that has been put on the table. It's being actioned by the organization. Super well received by the workforce. The workforce, once they find us, and we have had some recruiting challenges, but once somebody finds the Coast Guard, they know why they're there. They want to stay. The work sells. The value proposition and the return on investment for the Coast Guard is second to none. About a year ago, we were 3,500 non-rates, junior people short. That's down to about 2,500. And we did that by reinvesting in recruiting capacity. We turned on junior ROTC programs, exciting the youth, illuminating to the youth that the Coast Guard is an incredible organization. And if you have any tendency or inclination to serve, the Coast Guard is the right choice.
Final question then. I'm glad you got a chance to put in a plug for the Coast Guard. In addition to the recruiting challenge, other challenges, other things you're worried about, other things going forward that you think are going to be crucial for the Coast Guard to solve?
We got great bipartisan support. I was just at a Coast Guard caucus breakfast this morning on the Hill, and both sides of the aisle speaking positively and strongly in support of the Coast Guard. We don't have the procurement, construction, and infrastructure budget that we need. We're at a 10-year low. We were funded at about $1.4 billion this past year. That's significantly less than what we need. I have half of the maintenance account that I need to maintain and do heavy maintenance on all those new ships and old ships, and ensuring that we've got the budget support to do all of the great things that I've talked about. And then the one last thing where we've spent a lot of time in it, it is around service culture and ensuring that we've got a service culture aligned with our core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty, and that we're ensuring that everyone, everywhere, always in the Coast Guard has got the opportunity to serve, be valued, heard, and be safe. At the end of the day, it's all about people. All those ships, all that stuff we do, it's people, 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 and I'm committed to making this the best experience for those that are in and those that choose to join in the future.
Thank you for coming on the War on the Rocks podcast.
Thank you.
Please don't forget to check out our membership program at www.warontherocks.com/membership. You'll get Mike Kaufman talking about the war in Ukraine, You'll get Ankit Panda talking about nuclear war and much, much else.